welcome to Camp Constitutuon Radio with your host, Hal Shurtlef. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also pick it up on IPMNation.org on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. That's an online news source based out of Concord, New Hampshire. And also on our Podomatic page. Just go to Podomatic.com and put in Camp Constitutuon Radio, and you'll be able to find not only this show, but many other shows we've done in the past, and even some special interviews going back from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And this show is brought to you by Camp Constitutuon, which, among other things, runs a week-long family camp. At this year's camp will take place in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, in western part of the state. And we've got a great lineup so far of guest instructors, including Lord Christopher Monckton and Mrs. Chris Ann Hall and Dr. Duke Pesta and Professor Willie Soon. Well, we have a guest on the line, Mr. Alex Newman of WorldNet Daily and the New American, and also Freedom Project Media. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great. How are you, Hal?
Good, very good. I'm glad to see that you're sort of a regular on the Freedom Project Media. Talk a little bit about that before we get into our topic, because I think between you and Duke, I think Duke Pesta, you guys should be getting a lot more views than you do. So talk a little bit about that if you could.
Sure. Well, thanks, Hal. Actually, starting some months ago, I started a blog over at Freedom Project Media. It's called the Newman Report, and I normally put out one or two articles, short articles, little blog posts per week, virtually all of them dealing with education, whether K through 12 or kindergarten or even university. And, I've done a handful that weren't directly related to education, but the great majority are on education. And then Duke and I also do a weekly segment called The Takeaway, where we, for the many, many millions of Americans who unfortunately are unable to read thanks to government schools, at least they can access some of the material via YouTube and via video. So we make that available also for our audience that is unfortunately unable to read.
And also, so you can either go to Freedom Project Media, FPE, right? Freedom Project Media, or just FPE.org. What's the website there?
I think it's freedomproject.com or freedomproject.org. And then if you go there, you'll see, the Newman Report. You might even see a picture of yours truly. So just click on that, and you'll see all of my latest articles up there. So.
You made that distinguished, young, handsome guy with a whisker. Be whiskered.
Yeah, not that guy. Yeah, that's me.
The other guy. That's the guy. That's the picture in the wallet. You like that better, right?
Exactly.
Anyway, the reason why I want to have you on, I read the article you did about the Chinese-United States Exchange Foundation and the influence, the undue influence, and I would say very wicked influence they have on American universities. And now we see it here in Massachusetts. They actually have an exchange program at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, and it was about 5 or 6 years ago that I learned not only do they have these exchange students, but every Friday when they have their morning drill, their morning formation, that the students, or I guess they call them midshipmen here, have to pledge, they play the Chinese Communist anthem, and they have to salute the flag of Communist China. And if they don't, well, they'll get demerits. If they refuse to, they'll get demerits. And eventually, now, I actually took a trip down there with a friend, and we did some video of that. The time we got down there, the students had left, but they still had the flag of Communist China. So tell us a little bit about this China-U.S. Exchange Foundation.
Sure. Well, it is a front, part of the United Front, the overseas influence operations of the Chinese Communist Party and the regime that it operates, enslaving the 1.3 billion people in mainland China. It seems that its purpose is to extend the soft power influence of the mass murdering dictatorship all over the world, particularly through education. And, just to start this conversation, I think there's some misconceptions about China because, nowadays it's promoted as the leader of globalization and they've reformed and now they're practically capitalists. Right, we hear that all the time. And it's so ludicrous, Hal. I mean, the overwhelming majority of the large companies on the stock exchanges there are majority owned by government. This is not capitalism. This is what the Chinese dictatorship calls socialism with Chinese characteristics. So they've implemented some market mechanisms, but they're still mass murderers. They're still barbarians. Their regime has still murdered more human beings than any other government in the history of humanity. They still torture people. They still strap women to tables and murder their babies to enforce their population control policies. They still chop organs out of Christians and Falun Gong practitioners for Chinese Communist Party members. This is a wicked, wicked institution, and it's using all these different front groups. The globalist system, as it's set up, has been hugely beneficial to communist China. So they have all this money. They're buying all this debt from the United States, and then they're funneling that money back into things like this foundation, which is, of course, funded by these pseudo entrepreneurs. Of course, they're members of the Chinese Communist Party and make billions of dollars through these relationships, and then they funnel it back into these organizations.
They're basically Chinese political operatives. They get special favors. I guess they call them princelings or princesslings. These people aren't disciples of Ludwig von Mises and are bringing incredible. That's the picture you get. And it's interesting. There was a lady I knew that hosted one of these students, these Chinese students, and they're getting these aren't just kids who are making their way, from the streets of Beijing and worked hard and studied and saved their money and got recognized. I'm guessing that these people are pretty much trained. These young students are trained to toe the party line, and they come on like the nicest people in the world, and I'm sure they are. They're probably clean cut. They don't use tattoos and use drugs, and so the average host is very impressed by how that can't be. These people are so nice, and then our students go over there, and they're treated like royalties, so they have nothing, like a big Potemkin village. See, that's right. The image we.
That's exactly right, Hal, and they've invested a lot of money in perpetuating these false images, both of the Communist Party government and of the Communist Party itself and of their economy. Part of that is their extending of their tentacles into American universities. And, this foundation, this front for the Communist Party is a big part of that. They throw money around. They have a partnership now with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which feeds bureaucrats into the overseas State Department, the CIA, the FBI. So you have all these students who are being, in a very real sense, manipulated through Chinese propaganda that's coming through conduits like this China-United States Exchange Foundation, controlled by communist operatives, funded by communist operatives for communist purposes. And, they don't know any better. They hear this baloney in school, and then they go to their government job believing this stuff. And it's incredibly dangerous, and it's happening all very surreptitiously.
Now, your article mentioned a positive thing that happened in Texas, the University of Texas. But if we go into that, do you know how many colleges that have these exchange programs around the United States? Is there a figure for that?
Well, there's a number of different tactics that they're using. As far as the partnerships and relationships with the China-U.S. Exchange Foundation, I don't have a firm number, and I'm not sure anybody does because they're throwing around money like crazy right now.
Right.
But they also have another part of this operation, and it's maybe controlled by different people and involves different front groups, but these are the Confucius Institutes that are popping up not just at universities, but at elementary schools and high schools across America, including all over Chicago, that are funded by the Chinese government under the guise of teaching American children about Chinese history and culture and language. And there's nothing wrong with learning about Chinese history or culture or language. That's a good idea, but not from the biggest mass murderer in history. I mean, it's unbelievable.
What sounds ironic is that when Mao was in charge, the so-called Great Leap Forward, didn't they do their utmost to expunge any of their history prior to the Communist Party? And Confucius was somebody that you didn't learn about as a communist in China. And now they're sort of putting a nice front and saying, we're just advancing the teachings of this wise man, Confucius.
That's exactly right. The Cultural Revolution was all about destroying the old China, eradicating it from the face of the earth. They took down the statues, blew up the buildings, killed the people who knew the traditions. I mean, it was just a complete cultural revolution, as the name suggested. And actually, the high-ranking members of the Communist Party, we have them on record, quoted on tape, talking about how these Confucius Institutes, Confucius has a good reputation, so we can use this as a way to promote positive propaganda in overseas. And it's not just in America. This is happening worldwide.
Now, what exactly happened in University of in Austin? I think it was the University of Texas.
University of Texas at Austin, exactly. What happened was the China-United States Exchange Foundation, again controlled by communists, funded by communists as part of the United Front overseas propaganda efforts of the Chinese Communist Party, they tried to throw a bunch of money at a China center that was being developed at the University of Texas, and the university initially was on board with this, and the foundation was allowed to do stuff in November where they were promoting communist Chinese propaganda on the campus. But a number of people expressed concerns to the university, including Ted Cruz. They said that, why are you going to allow a murderous dictatorship to give you money? What's that going to do for academic freedom and all the rest of it? And so university officials ended up declining the money. So that's a small victory, but you can be sure that the Chi-Coms will be back.
Well, I think that's important for now people who are listening to this that might either be going to some of these schools or know people that do. What would you recommend? What course of action would you recommend for them?
Some kind people who are going to a school where, I would say, do your best to find out what's going on, expose this, gather information so that other people can be aware of this. And what you see is, the people staffing these Confucius Institutes, for example, Beijing is very selective in who it allows to go overseas as part of these programs. They pick the most loyal communist apparatchiks. So, when they start talking about Taiwan, for example, they'll teach you that Taiwan is a part of communist China, the one China. Mm-hmm. And if you ask them about Tibet, Tibet, the Communist Party is doing glorious things in Tibet. Mm-hmm. Pay no attention to the extermination of the people who used to live there and the flooding of Tibet with ethnic Han Chinese as part of a genocide operation. They'll deny these things. They'll paint a totally false image of what's happening. And so it's good to get these things on tape so that they can be put on YouTube and lawmakers can be educated, university officials can see what's happening. It's important.
Now, you mentioned the one-child policy and the forced abortion. And the apologist for the regime there will say that they don't do that anymore. And I've heard that more than once, that's been done away with. Now, you're saying they still do it.
Oh, they absolutely still do it. They've updated their policy now. The central planners have decided that now it's okay for the citizens, to have two children rather than one. Yes, exactly. Quote-unquote citizens. And so now they've changed the policy a little bit. They've said now you can have two baby citizens, but if you have three, the same thing will happen. They will strap you down to the table. They will murder your baby. If they can't find you, they'll kidnap your family and torture them to make sure that they can find you. It's all barbaric beyond imagination.
So they instead of having one, now it's two. And don't you still need permission to have the one? Don't you need some kind of party permission to have one child?
Yes, you need to get a license and a certificate from the population control authorities at your local level, and they will give you, the certificate that you need, and then that allows you to enroll your slave in brainwashing program and healthcare programs and all the rest of it. And if you don't have that permission, you will face very serious fines. You won't be able to register your child for his indoctrination and all the rest of it. So, they're serious about it.
Well, it's interesting. I had an interesting experience. It was about 10 years ago. I'm on a flight from Boston to somewhere, and there was this young family, Caucasians, with a little Chinese baby that was badly burned. And I was talking to the mom. The dad wasn't there. And so she told me that she and her husband were missionaries to communist China. And, of course, when you can't go into China as a missionary. You got to go in there as a teacher or some other profession. They found this little female baby in the woods that was abandoned. And she said that these one or now two child policies, that they prefer males because the males are more likely to be able to earn more or do either. It benefits them to have males as opposed to females. I guess Mao was a great advocate of equality for women, but it really didn't seem to matter because they're still second-class citizens or third-class citizens. So they abandoned the females, so when they do have the babies, they throw them in the woods. And she said that they found it, and they brought the baby, they adopted it, they brought the baby to the Shrine to Burn Center in Boston, which is one of the best in the world. But she said something very fascinating to me. Now, this is a woman who's a Christian. She said she would rather raise her children in communist China. And I thought, my goodness, I'm thinking, well, why would you do that? She said the communists in China do not sexualize their children, at a young age, unlike our public schools where they're pushing this stuff in kindergarten. So I thought it's interesting that even the communist Chinese know the dangers of destroying their children's, their sexual innocence. So while their people in this country will totally promote it in countries like that, just like the phonics in the Soviet Union. When John Dewey was kicked out by Stalin, what did Stalin say? It's okay to corrupt capitalist countries, but not so much here. I just thought that was a pretty very fascinating.
It is very interesting, and if you look, the communists have actually played a key role in undermining the moral fabric of our country. I mean, it was a deliberate strategic operation because they wanted to destroy the American people, physically, mentally, morally, spiritually, and this is a good way to do it, promoting wickedness and immorality, glorifying it, normalizing it. And, they don't want that for their slaves because they don't want their slaves to be useless. They want them to be productive for the high and for the good of the party.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting, too. I think it was the first so-called gay or homosexual organization in this country, the Mattachine Society, was founded by 3 communists. So,
doesn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, back in the late 40s. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Now, I have in Boston, a flag to Communist China is raised every year in early October to celebrate the Chinese Communist Revolution. And I think this happens in other parts of the country. And I remember that they raise the flag over the White House during the Obama administration, the communist flag. They had some communist dignitaries, and they raised the flag. But it's bad enough that a private, Chinese communist group that's considered private, a non-government group, arranges this. But the city of Boston, the city council, passes resolutions honoring the communist revolution. I'm thinking, are these people for real? Do they really know what they're honoring here? All of the 65 million, up to 65 million people were murdered during just Mao's regime alone. From 1948 until early 70s.
Yeah, and
it still goes on.
Absolutely, and what's crazy? The people who we think of as the globalist masterminds, David Rockefeller, who boasted in his autobiography that he was conspiring, was his word, with a secret cabal against the best interests of his own country to build a one-world economic and political order. I mean, you can read that on page 405 of his autobiography.
That was in his own words. That's right.
In his own words, right? He identified himself as a conspirator. In his own words, he said he was proud of conspiring against America to build a one-world order. And he wrote in the New York Times in 1973, he went to communist China, and he came back with this glowing report. He said, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao is the most important and successful in human history. So
human history.
It's incredible. People think of, the communists and the super capitalists are opposed to each other. In fact, they're on the same team, and you're not on it.
And you can actually probably find that article online. From
it's still on the New York Times website. Yeah, it's still on the New York Times website. 1973 op-ed by David Rockefeller.
And didn't he say it was regardless of the cost, it was worth it?
Yep. He didn't mention the cost. 65 million victims murdered, a cultural heritage that took thousands of years to develop, utterly destroyed, laid waste. Torture on a scale unimaginable, I think, to modern-day people. Parents and children fighting, turning against each other, children ratting out their parents to the communist authorities. Barbarism almost on an unprecedented scale. And David Rockefeller thought that was great. It was the most important and most successful social experiment in human history, according to a self-described globalist conspirator who's, he's chaired the Council on Foreign Relations. He's been on the steering committee of the Bilderberg. But this is an influential guy. That should be cause for concern.
And, it's interesting, too, in this bipartisan country we live in, Democrats want to blame Republicans and Republicans want to blame Democrats. But I recall, I'm almost 59, I recall it was good old Richard Nixon. The last time I checked, he had an R beside his name, right? He was the one that opened up China, and George H.W. Bush was the first envoy. I don't think it's before we established diplomatic relations. It was a Republican, and then at the UN, the wonderful peace-loving people at the UN kicked out Taiwan. They lost their status at the UN. And they gave it to Communist China, and everybody was wildly applauding the fact that the Taiwanese had no representation, but now Communist China was recognized as a legitimate nation. As they were flooding drugs into our country, as they were aiding and abetting the North Vietnamese, and of course during the Korean War, they were responsible for torturing our prisoners, doing the brainwashing techniques, which I think is where the term was coined by Edward Hunter. how they would take these prisoners of war, try to turn them against the United States. And that was done by our wonderful, our Chinese communist friends.
Yep, and a lot of people don't realize it goes back even further than that. I would argue treasonous, certainly globalist establishment types within our State Department, within our Defense Department, within our executive branch of government played a crucial role in delivering China to the communists at every step of the way. And it's a long and detailed history, but they ensured that Stalin would get all of the Japanese arms and ammunition from Manchuria after the war. Obviously, Stalin used that to arm the Chinese communists, which anybody with two brain cells to rub together would have understood that. Stalin never lifted a finger to fight against Japan. He was allowed to declare war on Japan a couple days before the whole show was over. A Soviet troop never set foot in Japan, never risked his life to fight against Japan. That was my grandpa and many other brave Americans. We stabbed Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader of the anti-communist Chinese, in the back. We put an arms embargo on him. We had people in our State Department and our Defense Department bragging about this. George Marshall, for example. And I can say, I think with confidence, that the Chinese communists would not have been in power, would not have gotten into power without the deliberate aid of establishment, deep state, swamp creature, insider, whatever you want to call them, in Washington, D.C. and in New York.
And George Marshall, didn't he say that with a stroke of a pen, he disarmed 50 divisions of nationalist Chinese when they stopped the weapons shipment?
And Congress had made clear that they wanted Chiang Kai-shek supported. They had passed laws saying, hey, let's send them arms and ammunition so they can protect their country from the Japanese and from the communists. And treasonous people within our executive branch agencies made sure that didn't happen.
There's a great book that you probably have read, written by Robert Welch. It's entitled, Again, May God Forgive Us. I think it was, first it was called May God Forgive Us, and then he added a biography of Chiang Kai-shek, whom he knew, and went to Taiwan and visited with him. And I understand that book was actually translated into the Mandarin or whatever language is the major language in Taiwan. And the reason why I bring that book up is I just have about 100 copies. When I go to, I've been friendly with some local Falun Gong people, and these people are very peaceful people. It's not a religion, so forth. It's more of a philosophy of relaxation and exercising and so forth. And they're pretty harmless people. They're not planning to overthrow. But when you belong to a Falun Gong, you have to get out of the Communist Party, and that's what the communists in China don't like. But they even have a hand. The Chinese communists are influential in our Chinatowns around the country.
Oh, absolutely. I did actually a very in-depth investigation of this some years ago for the Diplomat magazine, which is kind of an establishment publication, actually, but it was nice that they allowed me to write this. But they have their agents all over the United States. In fact, one of the guys that I interviewed, one of the experts, said that you should automatically assume that Chinese are agents of the espionage services, because that's how the espionage services view all of the overseas Chinese. Now, that doesn't mean that every Chinese in America is loyal to the regime in Beijing. In fact, many of them fled it, and for good reason. But the Chinese government considers that all of these Chinese must pass information to them and must be loyal to the motherland. And that's a dangerous situation. A French intelligence expert estimated that the Chinese regime may have 2 million spies overseas.
That's incredible. And these people aren't like on the payroll. They're probably living here in various capacities as engineers or what have you.
Working for our defense agencies.
And they just simply pass information off to the local agent or what have you. And wherever. And they have a lot of influence actually at city halls. When they fly a flag, they wouldn't allow us to fly a Christian flag, and that lawsuit's hopefully be filed soon. But the communist Chinese flag is welcomed here.
Yeah, insane, unbelievable. And the American people need to wake up to this. I mean, we're dealing with an existential threat here. You have George Soros running around telling anybody who will listen that communist China needs to own and run the new world order. You have communist Chinese agents, known communist Chinese agents, taking over every conceivable international bureaucracy. I mean, Interpol is now run by a known communist Chinese agent. He was the vice minister for public security for the dictatorship, is now running Interpol. And as soon as he took over, one of the first things they did was issue an international arrest warrant for a dissident who's been trying to blow the whistle on corruption in the Communist Party from New York City. So they are out of control. Wow. They're taking over the international institutions. Obama invited their troops here to American soil to train them, for our forces to train them. So we have two problems here. We have the globalist effort to build this totalitarian global system with the communist China playing a lead role, and then you have treason within the United States that is aiding and abetting this at every step of the way. And you know all about Chinagate and Bill Clinton, how he sent them all our military secrets.
Right.
So it's crazy.
Actually, what was interesting, there was a high-tech jet engine company in Columbus, Ohio, right to the airport, and I knew a gentleman that knew the place very well. And Clinton gave them. They didn't sneak in. They didn't need their spies. They simply bagged up a truck and took this stuff. And they said some of the employees tried to barricade. Now this wasn't old stuff. This was state-of-the-art technology that was going to communist China. And I think it's important too that most people don't realize the impact that our country has. As we mentioned earlier, that we built the Chinese steel industry, and it was done during the Reagan administration with the most favored nation trading status back in the 1980s. And when the average well-intentioned conservative will say, Reagan, I'm a Reagan Republican. I said, you are, and you're bragging about it. They have this notion that Reagan was some kind of hardline anti-communist. It was keeping the Tricoms at bay, but just the opposite. Oh, by the way, I went to the Chinese United States Exchange Foundation website, and the first picture you see, you remember who it was? Good old Henry Kissinger. Good old Henry Kissinger. Wow. They have a number of pictures, that kind of, 2 seconds, and then it goes into another one. I said, look at this, that old rascal. He's the one that really played a key role in opening up communist China, and, of course, making lots of money. He made a fortune. What was the name of his Chinese-based company? Kissinger and Associates.
Yeah, he's got Kissinger and Associates still, yep. And
Alexander Haig. And Alexander Haig worked for them. So there's lots of money to sell out your country to China.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's very lucrative. So anyway, we got a couple of minutes left. Where can folks get? You mentioned some articles. Where can they find some of these archives, and how can they learn more about your work?
Well, if they want to read the article that we've been discussing here, you go to freedomproject.com. And just click on the Newman Report or the Takeaway, and you'll find all the articles there. I also have articles at the New American. I've written about communist China for a wide array of publications in the United States and around the world. The biggest single investigation I did, that appeared in the Diplomat magazine. You can look that up. Just look up China's growing spy threat. Actually, the Minister of Home Affairs over there responded to my article with a nasty message. So
oh, really?
He was not pleased with me. I encourage people to check this out.
It's interesting. A few years ago, I was in Indiana. It was in Indiana, and a gentleman came. It was at a meeting. He came up and he said to me that he was a Vietnam vet, and he stopped by this company that makes medical equipment. I forget what it was called. I'm thinking Paragon, but it might not be right. And he said that they were flying the Chinese flag on the property. He went in there. He said I was, firm, but I was polite. And the woman who he met, she says, "Well, come in tomorrow." We came in the day after. And there's a manager, and the guy says, "You come on my property again, I'll have you arrested." So I said, "Oh, really?" So I went to the place with my trusty video camera, trying to get a little video of it. I think it was Paragon Medical Equipment in, I'm guessing Elkhart, Indiana, but it's probably nearby. And there wasn't any wind, and I said, "Lord, I need a wind." And sure enough, the Lord had provided it, and there was a nice breeze. And I was able to do a little, 10 or 15-minute video talking about communist China and all, all the problems. And I put it on YouTube. Well, within no time, I got like 15 or 20,000 views and a lot of thumbs down and some vicious comments. So they have their trolls that go I'm going to put this video out, turn this into a video and see just how quickly the trolls go after this. So it's interesting.
And they'll go quick. We were intimidated at a UN function by a communist Chinese functionary. He was following us around, taking pictures of us. Very, very bizarre. So
Yeah, I think I remember. Was that in Utah, Salt Lake City?
No, that was in Paris, France, actually. And we reported to the police, and they said, we can't do anything. That's sovereign UN territory for the duration of the conference.
Wow. So, well, Alex, we're out of time. The fastest 30 minutes in radio. So I want to appreciate it. And, folks, thanks for listening. You'll be listening to Camp Constitutution Radio on WBCQ The Planet. And until next week, God bless.